Hello, Avengers! Yes, I am that nerdy today. I'm Roth Cornet, that's Dan Murrell. That is Joe Starr, and we are here to spoil the crap out of Endgame. But for real this time. So get out, go away, go see the film if you haven't seen it yet, and then immediately come back and watch us because we love you so much. We want to talk about this movie with you, but we want you to have the joy of the experience completely unspoiled. We are not the people that are leaving the comments online, and we hope you are not too. That's the last warning, yes?
Spoiler alert. Yep.
Spoiler alert.
Here.
And we have a graphic situation, but if not, I just did it. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's talk about the movie. There's so much to get into with this movie. We did our spoiler-free review just sort of talking about, essentially waxing poetic about it.
Yeah, which, again, I'd never understand how you guys are capable of doing that. You are phenomenal, super-powered people in your own right. I don't understand how you do it.
There was one, in this movie in particular, Dan, I don't know how you feel, but in this movie in particular, I was incredibly cautious to not say even. I walked up to the edge to compliment the screenwriters about how they had used callbacks, and I didn't even want to say that. I realized because I thought it was
That
too close to time travel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's been very difficult to sort of talk about the movie without even, you can talk about thematically, but you can't say whose themes or what themes or which ones they call back on and what they mean, because it's so, I think this Endgame does what a great finale does, which is it gives closure and context to things in such a way that it improves moments in earlier films. It improves the moment in Age of Ultron when Captain America tries to pick up Thor's hammer. It improves... Black Widow's a character that I think has gone through some fits and starts as far as her development in the MCU, but the way that it comes back to her thematic thing that was set up in the first Avengers movie, which was I Have Red on My Ledger.
Yeah.
And this idea that she is in a search, a quest to correct the wrongs of her past, and
would you say to balance?
Yeah, the balance, and she sees this opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's and does it.
Well, we want to get into that. Yeah. We want to just sorry, go ahead.
So, and then with Tony Stark, just the idea of protection.
Yeah.
The idea that every movie, when you go back and watch and then see how his story ultimately ends, is every big move that he made, everything he went through was about either a fear of being the guy to make the sacrifice play, as he was in Iron Man 3, or this person who's obsessed with protecting people and is
at all costs.
At all costs, and ultimately what becomes his defining heroic trait was also the thing that cost him the most and cost the Avengers the most in the past with Ultron. And what fell out from that. So it's just very thematically rich.
Yeah.
That's good because it frames everything into a context, which is what you want from the finale.
Yeah, absolutely you do. Well, we want to start with the biggest events of the film. And obviously, this is a film that was completing what was started with Iron Man, which is this franchise that, we've said it a lot before, shouldn't have worked. Nobody thought would work. Nobody thought Iron Man would work as a movie. And miraculously, though there are a couple of offshoots and fits and starts for some characters, it really beautifully brought it full circle. And it did feel, as Thanos isn't inevitable, but this movie is, which I think is one of its greatest strengths, because Tony's end, I think we probably all saw that coming, to some degree, but it also felt right when it happened. Cap, for me, I thought Chris Evans was exiting the franchise, but I didn't think he would die. I actually thought he would go back in time and be able to have a life, because he's been so beset upon. He's never been able to be, he's a virgin, as far as we know, who was not no more, who was on ice for 40 years and never really got to live a life. Tony did get it. And he was, it's so much more poignant because he was lost just at the moment he had everything to lose. And I gotta say that your description of Black Widow in terms of cleaning up the ledger is true, but it's also like she might be the most tragic character of all of them, and she was the one that shocked me. I really didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I thought the biggest strength was, I think we all had a bingo card. Or not a bingo card, like a checklist of we were all expecting, everybody, because, as smart fans, you kind of go in and well, I know whose contracts are up and who's not. And I know what Hemsworth has said about Thor. I know Evans wants out. So I'm just waiting for it. But I thought the real success of the movie was that when those moments came, I I felt them and I was invested in them, and I wasn't just like, check, Hemsworth might be, I felt all of those things. No matter how much of a smart fan I am, or how sort of connected to every business choice and rumor in the industry that I am, this movie was still able to let me like push that stuff aside and stay fully invested in the ends of these characters, which I think is huge. Especially, there's so many eyes on the ins and outs of the MCU that you could actually take off that hat, and put on a Feige hat. I don't know where I'm going with hats. I was able to take off my my fan and industry hat and put on my completely blank undercover hat. As an MCU fan, I thought was just really huge and very cool.
I mean, I think that's, to me, the real success of the film is that is how these things should have happened. It was organic to who they are, to the arcs that they've had. It's such a beautiful way to tie this up. It had to end with Tony dying. He's the one that started it. I think this is the only kind of emotionally satisfying way, and I thought the way they handled it was so great with, they had the most important people in his life in this world present.
The kid from Iron Man 3.
Absolutely. Right, exactly. Well, I think he, though, to Pepper, easily could have been a throwaway character, and it was really Downey that made sure that she wasn't, and all of that paid off in that moment when she gives him permission to let go at the end.
Yes.
Because what I was going to say is, like, clearly, Peter Parker in the expanse of his life has only been in it for a very short period of time, but is incredibly emotionally important to us. And so seeing him with Peter and then having Pepper come in and saying, it's okay, we're going to be okay. All of us.
That's the impressive feat of writing this project, is that they were able to balance so well what we needed as fans, but also what these characters, if you're going to be respectful of them, also need and require. Because again, this could have just been pure fan service, and it could have been Peter holding him in his arms and being like, now none of us feel so good, and crying as he dies in his arms, or something like that. But they gave you a little bit of that for us, because we needed that, because after Infinity War and I Don't Feel So Good, that was like everyone's big sort of emotional like punch to the gut. But then the movie was able to backpedal and put Gwyneth Paltrow front and center. Gwyneth Paltrow, not a lot of people's favorite person. Pepper Potts, not a lot of people's favorite character, but
killed it in that moment.
Killed it in that moment, because that was what Tony's arc, Tony's character needed. They were able to balance those things so well.
The way they handled that, I think, shows, and when we did an unspoiler review, I talked about how the Russos really, and Marcus and McFeely, the creative team, they showed a real respect for and a love for the fans, in the sense that, like, they wanted to give them the best product they possibly could, not just something that would hit all the, as you said, tick all the boxes, but something that would actually have emotional impact. And what I love about Tony's death in particular was, you could have done the tearjerker battlefield death scene that Deadpool 2 made fun of last year, to give Tony Stark his last big emotional scene. But I think it shows a real emotional maturity on the part of the creatives behind this movie, that they knew that the maximum impact is to not show the effect that it had on Tony. He doesn't say anything. I think his last words as a corporeal being, he's got the hologram, but are, I am Iron Man. Which, by the way, that line shouldn't have worked on paper. And God, was I crying. We'll get into the crying. But they know that for maximum emotional impact, really, it's showing everyone else dealing with it. It's not Tony's death. It's what it's doing to everyone else. How seeing everyone else, like, I was welling up. Because it was not that Iron Man died necessarily. It's the almost beauty of seeing the profound effect that this person had on so many people, and everyone gathered together, and the cheeseburger thing, really, more than anything, Jon Favreau telling a kid that he's going to get her cheeseburgers, to me, was like the most emotional moment in the movie.
It was one of them.
And he can barely say it.
It's about the impact that this person had, and I mean, that's death and that's grief. It's not focusing on the person who died.
Agreed.
It's about what's left behind.
They could have.
How that
I think you're absolutely right. They could have so easily. He hands the arc reactor to Peter, and he's like, "It's your fight now," or something. Blah 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 blah. Which would have. I'm sure they all would have hit a home run with that and nailed it as best they could have. But I think you're absolutely right. It's about everyone reacting in that scene that just made it so strong.
Well, I think the Favreau cheeseburger line, which honestly, when I walked out of the movie, I'd written down a number of things that I wanted us to address post-film, and I really wrote down cheeseburgers as one of them because it was it was like timelines cheeseburgers. Or maybe the reverse order, because I think it's the emotional payoff that is what's really resonant about the movie. The reason that I think works so well is because he's noting what his daughter has lost, that she's lost I could cry right now thinking about it, lost this father that loved her so much, 3,000, and would have been a great father to her. And he will do anything to kind of make up for that gap. And all he has to offer in that moment is cheeseburgers. Yeah. So I think that's why that works. And why it works for Pepper is she is a little bit speaking for the franchise, not cynically, but saying we're going to be okay moving forward without you. But really, it was about that family and giving him permission, because he had felt the weight. Tony's character, more than any other character besides Cap, I think, had felt the weight of the responsibility, and he needed that permission to put that weight down.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I feel like I love the interaction that they had at the beginning of the film, largely because it resolved a big part of the rift that began in Civil War in the first place. Was that Captain America's always felt the responsibility and put it on himself in a different way. Like, Captain America is always, like, his response has always been, our responsibility is to avenge.
Yeah.
And Tony's has always been like, no, our responsibility is to protect, so we don't have to. And that was always the thing, was like, Captain America's like, we don't need to be put in check because we're here. We can react to whatever we need to be. And Tony's always been like, no, we need to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place. And so I feel like this ultimate act of protection was, in retrospect, and we should have seen it coming, but like, for him to make the ultimate act of protection is like, that, of course, that makes perfect sense.
Well, I think the other thing about, and we'll have to give Black Widow her due also, but I think the thing about Captain America's character for me is not so much that he's saying we shouldn't protect, we should just avenge, is that he's such a believer in liberty, and he's such a believer in the idea of free will and everybody being able, he doesn't want he thinks those liberties are more important than the risk of not having them, right? So like, that is an inevitable, very American debate, right? Very I guess it's a global debate at this point. And he's always stood very firmly on the side that it's more important to have the personal liberty, which is one of the things that I find fascinating about a character that could have come in and be speaking for a very different perspective, but which is why there's some chatter online. Our producer, Max Dion, has alerted us, and I actually haven't seen it yet because it's just been a busy few days, but about how this end of him going back and living out his life with Peggy undercuts who that person is, because isn't he then allowing people to die? Isn't he then not being a protector? And to me, he deserves this. He's been robbed of his life. He's been robbed of the opportunity to live that life. But also, I think it's right in line with his character in The Perfect End, because he does believe in everybody's free will, which means he's not going to think that it's his job to interfere with, certainly not with time, in outside of the way that he had to in this movie.
Yeah. There comes a time in everyone's life. There comes a time in everyone's life when you're dealing with pop culture IPs, sci-fi, fantasy, Star Wars, Marvel, Trek, whatever, where you have to turn off well, if they went down that hall in the Enterprise, like, that means that you have to turn that off at some point and say, you know what, I'm watching a story with themes and messages and stuff that it wants to hit, and they're not always going to be literal. The things they want you to feel are not always going to rely on literal things. The Last Jedi had Broom Kid, and my reaction walking out of Last Jedi was not, but who is Broom Kid? What will Broom Kid do in the future? Will he, the point of it was he represents the emotional impact of Luke, blah, 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 blah. That is how I look at Captain America here. My first reaction is not, but what implications to the timeline does this have? This is, you gotta sort of fire on some different emotional cylinders here. This is Chris Evans saying goodbye, and this is the best poetic way we can send off him and his character. So those things don't bother me as much. This was a really beautiful, wonderful send-off, to the character. And at some point you have to turn off, like, but what implications to the timeline and, stuff like that. And
That
just
said,
appreciate it for what it is.
we are doing a whole other thing on the implications to that timeline.
I also think that you also have to give them the leeway to acknowledge that just because you interpret something one certain way doesn't mean how it has to be. I have a theory, for example, that it was explained earlier in the film by the Ancient One, good to see Tilda Swinton back, that when she's talking about the time stone, that when you make a change in a timeline, that timeline then, like here's where you live and this is where we are, and there's multiple realities. And we know that Captain America makes a change in a timeline. It's a branched reality. It's Back to the Future 2. It's not this reality.
Right.
It's a completely different reality where Peggy Carter doesn't marry the person that she marries canonically in the timeline that we know.
Well, I have a theory about that.
It's a new reality where now she and Steve are together, and Captain America, through through this experience, knows that there's a multiverse, knows that there are 14, like Doctor Strange, 14 million different ways that something can happen, knows that it's inevitable that in some dark timeline somewhere something is happening. So number one, there's the assumption that Cap was in the timeline that the movie is in. I don't think that's necessarily true. There is a Hank Pym. There are Pym particles. And again, I think it's just like, do you want to ask questions or do you want to try to find solutions for yourself? The solution that I found for myself is like, what if he knows how to do this? He knows when he left. He knows when the second that he disappeared. Who's to say he wasn't living in a timeline with Peggy Carter where he did tell them that Hydra had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., where he did rescue Bucky, where it was a substantially better future, that not by putting on a suit and a shield he made things better, but by using his knowledge in the reality that he lived in, it was substantially better. And then also knew the knowledge to say, like, as the sort of end to this, to give my friends closure after I've lived this time, I know where to tell Hank Pym to get me to. We know how to do time travel. Send me back to this timeline at this time. I'll be there waiting for them after I've disappeared. Like, that's what I think is, like, people sometimes jump to the worst possible conclusion.
Yeah.
When I think,
because we want to gotcha things.
Yeah, with the timeline and the crazy things with alternate realities, there are any number of possibilities.
There are. I mean, for me, I'm a huge Terminator fan, as some of you like Joe Starr may know. So for me, it was just the Kyle Reese effect, which is actually really beautiful in my mind. So in my mind, the way I justify that is that there are some time splinters. I think it's clear that when the Ancient One says basically, like, your timeline will be fine, but mine won't if I give you this stone. And so when she gets it back, Doctor Strange's timeline is unaltered and remains the same. But when they make a mistake, so when Loki escapes, that is a splinter. When Nebula kills herself, which we should talk about, that is a splinter. There's a splinter with Gamora in the sense that there is a version of that character that had certain experiences and a version that never will. So there's splinters here and there, but with Cap, I thought that what it was the Kyle Reese effect. And Peggy's husband, the father of her children, was always him. It's just that she had dementia and didn't recognize him in the first place when he returned as a kid, and then she couldn't talk about it. Now that opens, or she couldn't talk about it because she knew it would just mess things up. But what that opens the door to is, was he hiding the whole time? Blah, blah, blah. So your solution solves that. Either way, I think the point is
it was such a poetic ending for the character.
Resonant, poetic ending for the character.
Yeah.
I thought it was beautifully done.
I think... Yeah, and I think both of you, however you need to, like, kind of wrap your head around it, I think totally works. For me, timeline issues and splinters and stuff like that. More importantly to me, it's what stories they want to tell moving forward. Do multiple time splinters set up the next phase of the MCU? Okay, interesting. Are they just kind of like, you know what? This is the story we wanted to tell, and we're not really interested in what happens if past Gamora gets shunted to the blah, blah, blah. We're not really interested in doing it. Here's what's happening moving forward. Then I'm also on board with that. Like, I don't...
Well, the Nebula moment, I mean, again, this is one of my favorite things, so we won't spend too long on it. The Nebula moment proves that there are splinters because she doesn't disappear.
Right.
In other words, she kills herself in the past, and that is a splinter because that character never had those experiences that she did. So that is a splinter in the timeline, but it doesn't, to your point, the only reason that it matters is when we're like, what's the Loki series going to be? Well, it's probably going to be him escaping with
with the
Tesseract, you know, and causing all kinds of mayhem. That's why it matters, is that they, I think, tried to create a situation with their Looper-esque joke explanation where they absolve themselves of having to perfectly answer this because no human being can, because time travel isn't real as far as we know.
Yeah.
And then allow themselves the creative license to say this is an intact timeline that you're going to keep experiencing, but we could go to other places and do the Marvel animated one, What If, with Chris Evans, and do a version of his life where he's a comic book artist and one where he's in Hydra. If you need to see evil Captain America, one of our colleagues was like, oh, he could go back and be in Hydra. I don't want to see an evil Captain America. I love this character so much, but if you want to see that, I think that's fun, and those are the ways that's available for you, you know?
Yeah.
Black Widow, though, I have to say where they handled her death so well. They've also kind of like talked out of both sides of their mouth. Were like, oh, you can't come back if you've been killed for the Soul Stone, but Gamora can. But it's fine.
Well, she didn't.
She didn't. A version of her did. Yeah. But with Black Widow, I was completely unsure in that entire sequence with Hawkeye which one it would end up being until it was ultimately her.
Yeah, me too.
That was so well done.
Yeah, it really, really was. Because you spend the whole movie just going, well, it's got to be Hawkeye, because he's spent the whole movie going, I got nothing to live for. But Black Widow, in a way, has spent, whether it's true or not, to her, she has spent her entire time in the MCU saying, I got nothing to live for. She's tried to find it every now and then, and it has not worked out. You know, obviously, is that her reality? No, but that's how the character has kind of always framed herself and always seen herself. So it was kind of interesting watching these two flip around each other, trying to have a I have nothing to live for off.
Yeah.
With each other. And yeah, you're right.
And there was also a love off. They love each other.
Yeah, they have an intensely strong emotional bond, and yeah, right up until she actually falls. And even when she was actually falling, I was waiting for some kind of extra trick arrow to somehow like boom her back up to the ceiling so he could fall. Phenomenally done scene. Red Skull's such a dick.
Red Skull's such a dick, and it's
How many
also
people has he stood up there and just been like, look at you two.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Well, apparently just two, because someone else would have had the Soul Stone if anyone else had.
True.
Well, also awkward moment when Captain America had to return it, and then he finds Red Skull when he's returning all the stones, and he goes there and he's like, "This guy?
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it to this guy. Fine, here's the stone."
Yep.
Like, I hate this guy.
Hello, Steve.
I remember you.
I want to see that What If, just what that conversation was like. That said, I think for her, you're right, Dan. I will say that one shocked me the most. I didn't see it coming. I was not happy in the moment.
Yeah.
Even though the movie had made me like Hawkeye more than I previously. The opening with Hawkeye and experiencing the first 20 minutes of this movie being basically The Leftovers, an episode of The Leftovers, really gave me a lot more empathy for Hawkeye, which I thought they were setting up for when he died. But no, it was really, I think, a brilliantly done fake out to then lose her, but also to show that they can, given the opportunity, have you care about a character in a deeper way when you didn't think it was necessarily possible. Now, I know some people love Hawkeye, and that's great. Don't be mad at me. I thought this served him a lot better than the previous movies.
I mean, I liked him since Ultron.
Yeah.
When we meet the family. They give him some character.
Yeah.
Something beyond being hypnotized.
Yeah.
For half a movie and then sitting in a bucket with an arrow. When Thor. I like that they actually gave him some, but they deepen that, probably because they realize that he's going to be around now for, in some capacity.
Yeah.
For
a while.
show. Yeah.
Certainly for the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
He also, I mean, I think that moment, Jeremy Renner's a really, really good actor. And I feel like he's an actor that always just wants character moments. And I think he's less comfortable with action hero moments and way more comfortable with you love your wife and your daughter and your sons and then they're gone. Like that is something he very clearly gets. And so I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful open for him and set us up really well. But for her, I think it was so clear that she was trying to fill that void. But that's a very tragic arc. She's taken as a kid, forced into this brutal training that if you ever watched Agent Carter, which is a really good show, they show what the training was like, and it is brutal for that program, the Black Widows, tell me what the program was.
The Red Room.
The Red Room, yeah. So that program, she lives her life. She finally finds this connection and this family. Half of them get, like, half of that ends. She's struggling to maintain any sort of identity, and then she dies. Beautiful in a way because she's able to redeem herself to herself. Nobody thought she needed that. But also, I think the most tragic of any of them. I mean, what has she never got anything. She never even got the taste of life that Tony got.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely the most shocking. They definitely pulled some pro wrestling with us in terms of like all the rumor and spin about a Black Widow movie.
No, there's going to be one.
Well, yeah, but just I feel like some of that was look over here or used in service.
Totally.
Hey,
Evans was doing the same thing. He was totally, when he kept talking about saying goodbye, he was trying to force you to think he was going to die. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I also don't fault them that. You got to use every trick you can to sort of get everyone to get the maximum experience out of the movie. Is it rough that the lone female Avenger died? Yep.
Well, original Avenger.
Original Avenger.
There's a lot
they are definitely
left.
if they hadn't done like quite a bit to really expand the roster and really show you what the future could look like moving forward, I think a lot more think pieces could be written on like what have you guys done. But I think purely for her character arc, as someone who saw herself a certain way and saw her needing to do things a certain way, whether or not that's your that might not be reality, but how you feel is real. I thought it was really, really well done. And sad.
Very sad.
And
sad. Other sad moments include, but are not limited to, the other moment that got me was, well, first of all, I think they were so brilliantly waited to say Avengers Assemble until this moment.
Yeah.
Boy, they waited until they earned it, man. That takes patience.
Was that moment, it blew my mind. Because I've seen so many of these, not just MCU, it's comic book movies in general. You don't think that they can do anything yet, and yet that moment, the Avengers, from the time that the portals, like as far as reveals go, and like you go back to the Infinity War review last year when I was just like, they're all coming back. Like, what's everyone? Like, we all know they're coming back. I've been saying that. And I knew that was going to happen, and that should have, like, just the way that I was approaching it, for me, that should have been just like here we go moment, of course. Like, the execution on that was so well done. From the moment the portals, that on your left, callback, and then the portals opening, but then Avengers Assemble, and that shot, or sequence of shots, like, that was a part of the comic books again. Like, I didn't think they could do that in a way that wasn't so messy, because I was 10 years old again with a splash page open in front of me. Yeah. Like this. Looking at, because that's the way they used to draw those big battles, was there's two sides, and then over here you have an army, and over here, like, it's the kind of thing where I would be looking at a comic book and going like, oh, there's Doctor Strange, that's Black Panther there, or like, oh yeah, there's Cap, and there, like, just, and the fact that they were able to translate that in a way that just didn't just look like
wasn't
a mess,
corny,
and it wasn't corny. No. It was just like, and using the Avengers Assemble there, not to mention the Captain America hammer thing.
Yeah,
just everything was executed so well, when it should have just been like, oh,
it was
really?
It was all so true to character, and I don't like how often the word fan service is being used for this movie, because I don't equate paying off 22 films well with...
People are confused about what fan service is.
Yeah, and because to me, the shot of Captain America just standing alone against all odds, against this horde, was not only just amazing, and that was one of my like, here we go, you know, if this is the moment, then this is the moment, you know, this is his for Frodo, except he's not turning around and talking to anyone, you know, he's got nobody behind him, but he's still gonna be the guy that draws the line and says, no, you move. Was so incredible. But then, and so true to character, but then even more true to character and to the themes that they've been trying to build with Captain America is that, yes, this guy is the guy that will stand on his own if he has to and say, no, you move. But there are always going to be people that are so inspired by that he'll never have to. And that's, that's such a cool moment. And for me, the way... the pacing of everything, I had completely forgotten that they fixed the snap. It had left my brain completely. So to the point when Sam is radioing him, I was like, who's radioing Captain America? Like, I had no idea what was happening. And then at just the right moment, I mean, I'm a sucker for watching a story unfold in the way that it needs to unfold. We talked about this.
Yeah.
And so everything just washed over me just at just the right times where I went, oh my God, that's Sam. But wait, Sam got snapped. Oh my God, they fixed this. Oh my God, what's happening? And then the portals are opening. And yeah, perfect moment.
One of the 3 or 4 times that I actually really welled up was, I think the Avengers Assembled moment was so well played and so well earned. And I thought it was both prescient and not, that they just hadn't let him complete it until that point. It showed a lot of faith and a lot of confidence in the franchise and a lot of restraint. But the moment that I actually welled up was when you just heard the crackle. Cap on your left. That was I don't know why. It was just like you're not alone. And he had, of course, it was like Cat and the Hammer and it was this incredibly epic showdown. But I thought it was brilliantly done that even with the full force of this character that we loved for so long, with all of his integrity, he's this worthy. He can wield the hammer. He's got the hammer and the shield. He's got the super serum. He's got really more integrity than any other human being on the planet that's ever lived. And it's not enough. He's still going to lose on his own, but he's not on his own.
Yeah.
I thought that was so beautifully done. I think they paid off. To your point about fan service, we talked about this. There's a massive difference between paying off the themes of a franchise and character arcs and doing a wink to try and win you over cynically. This is coming from zero cynicism. This is coming from pure heart on the part of all of the people involved, the actors, the writers, the directors, Kevin Feige. All of them care that this is truthful.
Yeah, and then that's the difference is I often, like we said in the spoiler, I use fan service often in a negative connotation because it's so often used cynically. Like the Han Solo moment from Solo drives me crazy because that just doesn't make sense. You're only putting it in there so people can go, oh, Han Solo, yeah, I know that name, or Darth Maul at the end of that movie. Like what real reason did he have to be there? Then people go like, I know Darth Maul. Like I don't mean to single out Solo.
At the end of Transformers, if you want to not single out Solo. Yeah.
I'll take your word on that.
Yeah. Well, anything being named a Transformers thing in the unrecognizable
it's
Transformers
thing of just
movies.
Like throwing out something familiar purely for name recognition.
Yeah.
Whereas, Captain America wielding
the MCU has done it.
Wielding Mjolnir is like the ultimate for a Marvel fan, the ultimate fan service moment. The image of Captain America with a shield in one hand and Mjolnir in the other hand, like that is such a fan service moment. Have my arms wrong. There we go. But it works because every step of the journey has made sense up to that. So it doesn't feel like they're doing it cheaply. It feels like this is the culmination of what you've learned about this character over the last 10 years. And that's the difference. It's not just, it would be the difference between Captain America wielding Mjolnir in the first Avengers movie and him doing it in this one.
So earned.
It's earned.
Yeah.
It's
11 years, 22 movies, now you get to say Avengers Assemble.
Yes.
But you had to earn it that long.
You had to earn it. Like we got the tease of it at the end of Age of Ultron, but he didn't say it.
Yeah.
He never said it in any other movie. The cheap fan service way would have been for even somehow in the first Captain America movie for him to say Avengers Assemble, or in the big circle shot in the first Avengers movie to say Avengers Assemble, and we would have thought that we wanted it there.
Yeah.
but it's the
We
knowledge
needed it
of
here.
the people behind this movie to know that no, you may think you want it in 2012,
Yeah.
or you may think you want it in 2015, but
It's
the
gonna-
only place for this to happen is in 2019 at this moment, and
Yeah.
that's the difference between good fan service and bad fan service.
Yeah, and I think it's just good storytelling and bad storytelling. I mean, one of the things that I was talking with a friend of mine about the other day was, look, I do not like the reactions of attacking critics who don't like things that you like. That's nuts. And critics are allowed to like or dislike this film and find problems. Nothing's perfect. That's all good. That said, what I would be surprised about is if someone that's really, really like thinking about what it takes to write a script and a story of this nature and the sheer complexity of writing of the story of this nature and all of the moving parts, because there are contracts, right? And there are character arcs that were set up. And there's so many of them, you know, to handle in one movie, plus callbacks and flashbacks, and to the use of time travel to give that complex of a set of circumstances, and for them to be able to write a script this skillfully that at the end of the day, if they were ever given this, we could either drive the plot this way or serve the character, every single time they chose to serve the characters, I think deserves so much respect. This takes an unbelievable level of skill and thought and adherence and patience and commitment to treating these characters with respect. Yes, they're in capes. Sometimes they're fat in capes, and we'll get to that. But I just don't think that you can look down your nose at comic book movies anymore. I don't think you should, because the level of skill that it took to pull this off is insane. Yes, they're broad. That's okay. Yeah. You know, but I am legitimately like kind of in awe that this creative team was able to pull it off.
Well, I have to. I will happily eat crow because I've been on our channel so many times, especially, you know, when you're on movie 16, movie 17, and you're kind of like, things are starting to feel a little repetitive.
Yeah.
I feel like there aren't any stakes. I've said on this channel, like, they're not going to pay off any of this Civil War stuff. What was the point? You know, Tony wrote him a letter or Cap wrote him a letter and whatever, we're fine. They paid all of those things off. Didn't just pay them off, they used them. Right up, even with everything going to hell, a much simpler movie would have had Tony walk off that ship and go, well, that sucked, but we're all back together, you know, like. Yeah. But they didn't. They stuck to their guns. They stuck to where the character had been, to where the character was going, and they used all of that to push through. So I will happily eat crow, like, because this more than anything reframes the MCU as 22 episodes of television with a really fantastic volume finale.
Volume, yeah, that's
volume
what we decided.
Finale.
It's a volume. In the car the other day, Joe and I decided it's this phase 1, 2, and 3 are a volume.
And sure, like, some episodes are gonna feel like everyone's just walking along the train tracks to some town in Walking Dead for 3 episodes. But
the MCU deserves better than that, Joe.
I mean, occasionally it has felt like that. But this reframes everything to matter, which is so fantastic. You know, Thor's arc is so masterfully done. Tony's arc is so masterfully done. Black Widow's is so well done. It's really phenomenal.
It's been such a love fest so far. Dare I broach?
Well, yeah. Well,
in my opinion, the one hero that didn't quite fit.
Sure.
Captain Marvel.
Oh,
and it's not their fault. In that
I didn't even have her on my list.
And it's not I actually liked Brie Larson more weirdly in her limited screen time in this movie than I did in Captain Marvel. But it was more of a thing of just like they had so much to do and so much established things to go back to that there just wasn't a place.
So you felt like her reemergence was a little Deus Marvelous.
I feel like she was in the movie because she'd already been introduced and they needed to, and literally she's in the movie for 5 minutes. She's in space.
She also tells you she's not going to be in the movie, which
She's in the movie for 5 minutes.
Which was the one moment that I felt that they were looking to camera. I may not be here for a while.
She leaves to go to space and she's gone for the entire movie. She comes back for a big moment, blows up Thanos' ship, proving why she couldn't have been there for the entire battle, because if she was, then this whole ship would have been destroyed before anything could come out of it. And then has a face-off with Thanos, and then is dispatched to allow the closure to the established characters that had to come in that battle. It's not a problem with her character necessarily, but that was the one thing as far as the ensemble and paying this off and paying that off. There were characters that didn't have much to do in this movie because they got brought back from the snap, and you just don't have time. You don't have time to do something really a lot with Black Panther. He had a great moment. Black Panther had a great moment in the film, but I feel like they did. That was the one thing where I felt they were stretching a little bit. Was they had this character in Captain Marvel that was immensely powerful. That it'd be weird if you didn't use her because you are going to space, so you don't have the weird space thing to go. But it felt like they had to come up with a way to bring her in. I love that the mid-credit scene in Captain Marvel was a complete fabrication. There wasn't anything even close to it in the movie, or maybe it was cut.
Yeah.
But then you have to send her away. And she's just got to be gone for the whole movie, and then she comes back, but then you have to figure out a way that she's not the solution because she is very powerful, and it's I felt like there was some strain there that didn't quite. It just felt like they didn't quite know what to do with her.
My take on that is that, to your point, that this movie was about the characters. This volume was the conclusion was about these characters that we have largely invested in for the past 11 years and all these other movies, and that it really was there to service. Look, the snap got rid of only the ones that were the new Avengers, you know? I mean, they were the ones that went away because this movie needed to service and pay off the stories for the first ones, right? So for me, they did have to find a reason that she couldn't be there. She wasn't snapped. So they said there's lots of other planets, which I think is like in a universe in which they're getting very galactic. It's okay to make that point because she'll probably be in a lot of other planets, hopefully. And say, you guys aren't the only ones. But you are this planet has the Avengers, so I'm going to let you handle it for a little while. I'm going to go off and handle it with the planets that don't have you, and try and sort them out. But I think that's why she couldn't be there. But the other thing that this movie is doing is underscoring, to your point with Thor. Thor is also very, very, very powerful, and what they did was give him an incredible vulnerability in this movie. They let him have a nervous breakdown. Because as he had this moment with Thanos when he realized he'd lost, and even more than Tony, and even more who didn't handle it well, Liar, I love that moment with Cap where he's so broken. Thor couldn't handle it. He melted down that he had just in a rage killed this guy, but still not been able to solve anything. And so for me, what Marvel has always been, not for me, but like I think in general, is that idea, and we talked about this in our spoiler review, of you're very human, you're very flawed. You have darkness, you have weakness, you have alcoholism potentially. You have all kinds of issues, and yet you still have the opportunity always to dig back in and in any given moment rise to your best self. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you'll always be living in that moment, which is what makes these characters interesting, and I hope what we see more of from her in the future.
Yeah, I've seen criticism about Thor's character. People saying like they turned him into a joke. They turned Thor into a joke. Well, it's like, well, first of all, it's more of a setup for him, and it's like, yes, you didn't get resolution on Thor's character nor on Hulk's character. Some people are like, well, Hulk is just kind of thrown in the movie, nothing really happens with him. Well, you have they're obviously carrying on in this universe, Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth, whereas you have to give resolution to characters that are not. And secondly, they set Thor on in much the same way that Thor Ragnarok put him on a different journey. This movie put him on a different journey, and I like how his character is yes, he's largely comic relief, but if you scratch beneath that surface, it's because of he buckled under the weight of he was the guy who was going to prevent a universal genocide. He had his shot. He had an open shot, and he missed. Yeah. And this is what happened. Yeah. And he thought that getting revenge would help, and it didn't. Yeah. And he just spiraled out of control. Now, the result of that right now is funny. because you've got Thor, going around and being the dude. I love get out of the way, Lebowski. But this is also not the end of his journey, and so we're gonna see more of that. Plus, people I think are overlooking the fact that he got closure with his mother.
Yeah,
there were some things that they did in service of Thor. So I feel like some people are giving Thor a bit of a hard time.
Stop being mean to Thor.
I have a lot of thought. If I could cycle back to Carol. Real quick. So I'm the one at the table that has not seen her movie yet, because I'm an idiot. So for me, this was my first introduction, really, aside from a beeper, to Carol, and she worked okay for me. She was a required blunt object in the same way that Thor was the cavalry in Infinity War. What I sort of saw possibly being set up as her character arc in the future is I am going to take on too much. Whether that's because it was in my training and background to do so, or because, continuing the theme of further, stronger, faster, you guys can take care of a planet, but I feel like to prove myself, I have to take care of an entire, galaxy. So I'm curious if what they're going to set up with her moving forward is the idea of stretching yourself far too thin, and so on and so forth. I won't harp on her too much because, again, I didn't see her movie.
Well, and if they do that, then again, that recontextualizes things, and we can only comment on the moment.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do that.
What I did appreciate, because I too kind of went into this one, after the beeper, I just watch stories unfold and I accept what I'm told. So when I see the beeper, I'm like, oh, Carol will pull Thanos' head off and use it like a hacky sack. 90s. And what I did enjoy was when she comes in, she's on an equal footing with the guy raw power wise, but you see real, what are they going to do with a Superman character that can just do whatever she wants and beat the crap out of everybody? She immediately gets outsmarted. She immediately gets outclassed by Thanos in the same way that the Hulk did. At the beginning of Infinity War, where Thanos was just like, I can't punch as hard as you, but I can punch smarter. Did sort of the same thing. With Carol. So as the lone person this was his first encounter with her on the big screen, that was sort of my take, where it's like she's a blunt object to be wielded, and in a movie with 1,000 people, I thought they did it okay. Thor I thought was brilliant. I don't agree. I'm with you, Dan. I don't agree at all when people go, oh, then you got turned into a big joke. If you don't think that comedy can accomplish more than just making you laugh at a person slipping on a banana peel, I don't know how to have that conversation with you, because comedy is capable of doing so much. Comedy is capable of educating. Comedy is capable of creating empathy. Comedy is capable of helping you deal with tragedy and trauma. And his arc has been so wonderful. He lost his mom in Dark World. Ragnarok hits it so well. He lost his hammer. Oh, so you say maybe this hammer is an extended part of yourself that you had sort of a very deep emotional connection to. When you lost it, you sort of lost part of yourself. Yeah, thanks, rock guy. Like, he had all these things. And then on top of that, he had his shot to save reality. He failed. Like, how much can you take?
One of the other things that our colleague Alan, who I was mentioning, who was talking about the potential Hydra storyline, which again I think, hi Alan, I think would be fun if that's what you want to see in a What If, was that they did exactly what you're talking about in terms of when she comes in to save the day and she's quickly outsmarted, is subverting expectations. And so I do think that what was done in this movie, and also to your point about humor, Marvel movies are funny, we know that, and it actually, I think, speaks highly of the Russos, of the writers, of the actors, of everyone involved, that they're able to pretty deftly ride that tonal line.
Yes.
Where we feel the impact of Thor's goodbye to his mother, but she's still able to tell him to eat a salad. And it's funny.
Yeah.
And like, that's actually demonstrative, not of a pitfall, but of an incredible skill set.
Yeah, everything can't be miserable.
Not many people can do that.
Everything can't be miserable in this movie the same way. Otherwise, this movie just goes, and you're gonna.
And Marcus and McFeely talked about that.
Yeah.
They talked about the idea of, because we've talked about it too, like fans are ahead of it, and they know they have to get ahead of it. Marvel knows they have to get ahead of it. So whether it's, here's a Captain Marvel. Well, no, you haven't seen it. I was going to do a Captain Marvel.
I don't care.
No, it's fine. I won't do that. I will just say that they set something up and then they really subverted it in the movies. Fan expectations a lot, like majorly. And so I think that's one of the things that Marvel is actually really good at. But and one of the other things, and we haven't talked about, I think they handled Thor really well, and they've also set him up to be the part of this. A movie that you said this, a movie with this much going on in it, and the fact that they spent that long on a potential knife fight at the end of it, like, also demonstrates incredible patience and sets him up to be a part of the Guardians. But one of the standouts for me, where they're able to hone in on a character and give them a lot, is Nebula. Man, she if you could steal the show, which you can't, from the main team, she would have for me. She had the biggest arc, the most substantial change, and it was really earned. And one of the most impactful moments where she has to assassinate herself, which I think is an incredible metaphor for what you have to do to truly change. You have to assassinate your past. And the part of you that's holding on to long forgotten, like, dreams that are weighting you down. The dream of pleasing her father had to be literally killed for her to be freed of it enough to be a full human being.
And I like what they did with her relationship with Gamora.
Yeah.
Because for up to really through Guardians 2 and then the consequence of Guardians 2, so much of her relationship with Gamora was Gamora telling her, you don't have to be this. You can be more. Like, I know that, like, Thanos is the enemy. He's the one that set us apart, and you're working for him, and you don't have to do that. And I like this, and I'm actually looking forward to this dynamic where, by having both of them there, you see Gamora in a place where we never actually saw Gamora. Like, we saw Gamora sort of in service of Thanos, but not really loyal to him that much. We saw the beginning of her turn.
Yeah.
And so now it's almost a flip of a switch where Nebula is now the one who has the perspective on the situation and saying, like, no, you don't like this guy. As a matter of fact, the way that I know you don't like this guy is that you're on my side and I'm not on my own side. And this idea that I like how they've sort of switched places now so that Nebula is the one who has perspective on it. Gamora going forward now is in a place where I'm sure the character is very confused because her life was essentially fast forwarded several years and everything about it changed. The person that she thought was, she was being raised by, while she does ultimately in this movie turn against Thanos, it's more of a being told that this is the terrible thing that's going to happen. It's not that sort of discovery that she was able to do in her prime timeline or whatever. So not on prime timelines.
I know.
But I like that Nebula is now, of the two of them, now Nebula is the one with the perspective.
Yeah.
And Gamora is the one that's trying to figure herself out.
Yeah.
And I love how they use the three of them, because really there's Nebula A, Nebula B, and Gamora. How they, through the three of them, they sort of repositioned all of their perspectives and timelines. And that's a good example of ending a story but character building at the same time.
Yes. And I think that's how they were really smart, going back to it, about deciding when and where there would be a timeline split. It was like really Loki escaping was in service of the story. Like, they had to have an obstacle, they had to have something to, but also there was a theme of facing yourself and America's ass with Captain America, but with Nebula, like, it fully was in service of the character that she is, right? She's a cyborg. So that's how they can hold her. That's how she can have to face herself in that way. It was a mess up, which they screwed up, or something they couldn't predict happened, which I think is also very human and inevitable. But again, it's in service of this larger character journey, which is her whole life, her whole a reason to exist, her meaning had been to please her dad. And in order to have a relationship with her sister and become a sister, she has to get rid of that and let it go. And they have to let go of like this kind of toxic, abusive childhood that they shared together in order to be healthy and full adults. And she's going to have to bring Gamora along. You're right. Like, that's way to reset those characters going forward for the next Guardians, plus Thor's in the mix.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm anxious to see how much they capitalize that. Just the frustration of being someone who's come through that path, through that journey, found sisterhood for the first time, and then is immediately, literally thrown back into the past.
Yeah.
And in a way has to completely go
Relearn.
through this entire journey again. There's a lot of very rich possibilities there if they desire in the future to explore those, which I hope that they do.
And if you like shipping things, she's going to show up, not know her relationship with Quill at all. He's going to know his relationship with her, and Thor's in the mix. I'm just saying. Yeah. I just want to reemphasize. I'm just saying that is the thing. I really loved what they did with her character. I thought, man, if there was a way to steal it away from these other ones, which there just isn't, she was equally well treated and well served by this movie. So I'm excited to see where they go next with those two women in this franchise, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, I don't think it was a fan service moment, but I do think it was a fan acknowledgement moment when they both walked up. Equally, historically, potentially could be the next Captain America. We've all been wondering which one it would be, and he just sort of sees the floor and says, "You go."
Well, yeah, Bucky giving a little nod was really the movie telling the fans that it's okay.
It's okay.
Nothing is being taken. No, it's not going to be a conflict. They were very smart to include a moment where when Falcon is offered the shield, his initial and first reaction is to look at Bucky and say, like, I am acknowledging that I'm probably not what most people would regard as the first choice. And by Bucky sort of saying, like, yeah, take it. It's yours. I like that. And again, I think that speaks to both of their characters as established in the MCU, which is like, I could see why Bucky would be hesitant to. Yeah. He's been through so much. To then be asked to take on a mantle like that, I don't know if I would do that either. I might want to take a step back and be like, I don't know if I want to throw myself into an active duty situation. I've done that. Yeah. And Falcon is
and whether it was forced on him or not, he's done terrible things. Yeah. Terrible things. And I think handing him the shield is not necessarily the path for redemption for those things. Both just from like a creative perspective and then getting in the character's head. You know, I think you'd feel like a fraud, just sort of waiting to be discovered. Sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the comics, they've both carried the shield, but you know, in terms of like the smaller things they've set up, you know, moving forward, I am sort of fascinated in the idea now of what's that show? Is it the two of them trying to fill the void? You know, like how do you move forward without your big brother who has always, you know, been there leading the charge? I think that'll be really, really cool.
I think that's what it is. I think it's just that. It's like Falcon's trying to be Captain America. He's trying to figure it out, and Bucky's there to help. You know, having known him his whole life. So, I don't know, man. I really, really think. Do you guys have more things?
No, I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
Like movie in general.
Yeah.
We got some Korg. I was happy about that.
That was fun.
Valkyrie, the new king of Asgard. Yeah. Which is great.
New king of New Asgard.
New king of New Asgard.
I was very excited that they did that. In the comics, I think it's in Oklahoma. But I appreciate that I think it's set where Odin was like, remember this place. Like I'm assuming that's supposed to be where it is. So I do think that's cool. As much as this, and I think we're making other videos and articles to sort of touch on this stuff, but as much as this was like a strong finale for this volume, it also set up so many cool fun possibilities. Thor literally was like, I don't know what happens next. This is going to be cool. So, I mean, does he just go off on his own, split from the Guardians and have his own space adventures, meet Beta Ray?
Take the full force of a star.
Does he? Yeah, is he going to take the full force of even more stars? Or if you like ships, is he going to take the full force of a Star-Lord? I think if Taika comes back, like, I'm down with another, like, weird Kirby-looking crazy space adventure. I am weirdly equally down with him just doing the day-to-day of New Asgard on Earth with Asgardians walking around with normal humans. And
how does that work at a Starbucks?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm probably more into the space thing, but I'm always more into the space thing. I like space.
That is completely fair. That is completely fair.
The Quill callback, can I just bring that up really quick? The Star-Lord callback. God, yeah. What I loved about that moment that it was taking the piss out of was, I'm an Always Sunny in Philadelphia fan, and there's in one of the episodes of Sunny, they go back to a high school reunion. I think it's a high school reunion or a dance, and they do this whole like kick-ass crazy dance sequence together, but then they cut to what that would actually look like outside of their own heads, and it is horrific and terrifying and not cool at all. And so what I loved about that is that they cut to what he actually looks like dancing around. I do wonder where Jaima and Hanazu was, because he should have been there at the same time too, but that's a nitpick.
I was waiting for the moment where he's like, who are you? I'm War Machine. Who? Punk.
But I did very much kind of enjoy the way that they were able to definitely remind you of everything that had come to before this, and have it not feel like a gimmick, and even point out something interesting about that moment from a slightly different perspective. You know, they did it with Hulk too. We haven't talked about Hulk.
We do. Yeah, we should talk about Hulk.
But they did do that with Hulk as well.
I mean, Hulk they essentially reinvented his character completely.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm
Professor Hulk,
which is why I'm not completely surprised that he sort of got the least to do in the movie. He had some very important plot functions, but as far as character stuff, it's a new version of this Hulk, so I think there's so much more to see. But the critique, the critique of himself, it was something we can all relate to on a less epic scale. But the idea of seeing an earlier, I've had to go back and look at some older reviews just from a couple years ago, and I watched it and I'm just like, oh my god, I just love that they're able to take something so seemingly fantastical, which is a gamma irradiated scientist,
and humanize it.
And humanize it is just like, I can't believe that's level. Me.
Yeah.
Oh,
and they also made him a little arrogant with that. Not arrogant, but I liked the fact that he was having fun having Hulk fans, and they don't know who poor Ant-Man. Yeah. Nobody knows who he is or cares.
Well, like, again, you know, everyone's going to cope differently based on what happened. And does it make sense that he's kind of jovial and snarky and taking selfies with who's left and stuff? I don't know, maybe not. But like, everyone's going to grieve differently and deal differently. And I think it's interesting that Banner, the guy that feels the most, has decided to maybe not, to just not feel.
Well, he's also found the degree of personal peace that he hasn't had since his accident. And figuring out how to merge these two personalities, he is now probably the most self-confident and self-assured that he's ever been, because he figured it out. So yes, it's a sad time, but this idea that in sad times people can only ever be sad all the time is like, that's just not the truth. Even in the darkest times, people find things that are joyous. That's Tony Stark's entire arc in this movie, was that he found, strangely, through the end of the world, he found the only satisfaction, real satisfaction he's ever had in his life, and he found the thing that he will make the sacrifice play for.
Yeah, and all of this, I mean, look, these big this is why I don't think we should look down on it. Like, these like archetypal characters like this are representing something. Jekyll and Hyde was representing something about the duality of our natures, and
Russell Crowe.
And Russell Crowe, and you can either decide to be very split and very torn inside yourself, or you can decide to accept the darker parts of yourself, and make them into a huge green man who takes selfies with children. You know, those are always your choices, man. That's the human evolution. I do think that there's something really lovely about that in terms of a character arc that also speaks to something that is incredibly human. And they did do that. They were able to go back and show these moments and give it a slightly new twist. By the way, I look at reviews that I did 2 days ago and cringe, so God bless you. I really think everyone was well served. Every single one of these characters well served. We are going to do a lot more about the future. We're going to do on Fandom a bunch. We're going to do a deep dive on the timelines and unpacking them. The future of the MCU. You're going to do some of that. You're going to do It Could Have Been What. We have lots of videos coming, including like big burning questions tomorrow, because today is Saturday. Or whenever you're watching this, there's other videos available for you to watch. But this was really just to talk about how they had served these characters. And I just feel like I feel very inspired by them creatively and kind of like as a person that did the work. Like we, the fans, we also did the work. We went to see all 22 movies. We paid attention, and this served
paid off.
And in the best possible version of this served the fans really well.
Yeah, and it's not lionization. This doesn't undo criticisms of past films. This doesn't retroactively make every Marvel film perfect.
No.
But a fantastic finale does so much toward putting closure toward the rest of the story that there are some things, like I mentioned, that are recontextualized. Yeah. And there are some things that, with perspective, you see are episodic. That doesn't mean those flaws aren't there, but when you also know the conclusion of the story, it really puts into focus what's important, what's significant, and what's not.
Yeah.
And you can judge accordingly better what's long-term and what's not. Ant-Man and the Wasp, when it came out, seemed to me, and in my review, a very kind of lightweight movie. But knowing in the task of the greater story that it does hold some importance as far as the ultimate Endgame, it adds a little extra weight to that movie. That doesn't undo the flaws that were in the film, but it recontextualizes that movie, and that's why you need something to tie everything together.
It gives it a little. Yeah, you're right. I think it gives everything a little more purpose. Like, even if all that movie functioned to do and accomplish was to strengthen the bond between Scott and Hope, then that pays off just that first moment that he sees her again, when she comes back after the snap, and they just have like this is great, but also let's kill a horde of things first. Even if that's what it gives us, that's important and that matters for the story.
Gave him something to lose and to fight for, for sure. And I just want to do a shout out to Evangeline Lilly and her hair, and this is why. I swear I did a whole conversation earlier about hair in this movie, which I won't get into right now, except to say this, for a man who was very defeated and depressed, Hawkeye had just come back from the barber when we meet him again with the Avengers.
It was a nice hairdo.
Yeah. It was a really nice hairdo.
We were talking in the room. That was a very sad trip to the barber. What are you looking to do? Just something that really expresses that I lost everything.
And I just want to do murder. But Evangeline Lilly and Peyton Reed told us this in our interview with him from way back about Ant-Man and the Wasp. By the way, I like Ant-Man, but there you have it.
I love Ant-Man. I just thought Ant-Man and the Wasp was a bit lightweight, as I said.
But she makes it a really a point with hair and makeup to say, no, mess up my hair because I would have been fighting and I'm running around and it wouldn't just be perfect, so I always mess it up. And you can see it on the posters. You could even see it in this film. It's just a tiny little detail that I really, really love about her. But that'll be all we say on hair for now. I'm not going to say that there's not going to be a deep dive on hair later. I'm not going to say that there's not, but there's going to be lots of deep dives on all of the things. This is a big movie, lots to talk about. You guys let us know what you thought in the comments below. We will be back here on Screen Junkies with all of the things. Meanwhile, I'm Roth Cornet on the Twitter and the stuff.
I'm Joe, and Spider-Man rode a Pegasus.
Oh,
how can you complain about that?
Yeah, he did, and also Tony Revolori, who is in Far From Home and Homecoming, I'm going to call out, did an amazing piece for us about his journey from a Marvel fan. Speaking of fans to being a part of the world, literally, from being a fan to being a part of the world. You are Dan Murrell on the Twitters and the things.
At Murrell Dan.
And we will be back to talk all of the Endgames, including the Endgame of Thrones.
For the next year, at least.
For a long time. It's going to be a while.